Honourable Senators, we're meeting to begin the study of Bill S-228, an act to amend the Criminal Code sterilization procedures. In our first panel, we're pleased to welcome the sponsor of the bill, Senator Yvonne Boyer. I want to say that our paths have crossed in Saskatchewan many years ago. I know that Senator Boyer is a champion on these issues. She's been working diligently on them since 2017. She has a compelling story. She's a Métis woman, a nurse, a researcher, and a lawyer. And I believe the Senate is fortunate to have the benefit of her expertise, her experience, and her leadership on these issues. Senator Boyer, you have 7 minutes or so to give an introductory statement, and then we'll move into the questions.
Thank you, Senator Arnott, and I'd like to thank all of you for the opportunity to be here today, and the survivors, thank you as well. Honourable Senators, I want to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I thank them for their guardianship of this land. I'm here to speak on Bill S-228, an act to amend the Criminal Code sterilization procedures. Bill S-228 criminalizes the act of forcing or coercing a person to become sterilized without consent. Bill S-228 is identical to Bill S-250 as amended and as it stood when it passed third reading in the Senate in October 2024. The drafting of this bill that sits in front of you is the result of careful and deliberate study by this very committee. In the previous Parliament, after hearing from my colleagues on the LCJC committee, departmental experts, survivors, medical associations, Indigenous midwives, and legal specialists, it was clear that both senators and witnesses had concerns about the broad drafting of the original version of Bill S-250 and the potential for unintended consequences. After hearing these concerns, I consulted with the Minister of Justice and his department to develop the amendment that significantly simplified the bill while maintaining the core goal to make it explicitly clear in the criminal code that sterilizing someone without consent is aggravated assault under Section 268, Sub 1. This amendment was unanimously adopted by the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee, this committee, on September 19, 2024. The amendment reduced the bill from 55 lines to 14, removing complexity and eliminating any potential unintended consequences. The bill targets circumstances such as those reported in the Kataska case, where Dr. Kataska, while operating on a 37-year-old Inuk woman, said, "Let's see if I can find a reason to take the other tube." And indeed he did. And this high-handed decision left her sterile. These are the circumstances and abuses of power that this bill targets. This bill is not aimed at inadvertent medical complications, recognized surgical risks, or procedures voluntarily requested by patients. Its sole purpose is to ensure that intentional sterilizations carried out without valid consent are unmistakably criminal. Bill S-228 is that very same text as Bill S-250 was in October 2024. I am reintroducing it in this 45th Parliament. The legislative mechanism is precise. Section 228, Sub 1 of the Criminal Code already defines aggravated assault as wounding, maiming, disfiguring, or endangering the life of a complainant. Bill S-228 inserts a "for greater certainty" clause, which clearly brings S-228 into the aggravated assault provisions in Section 268 of the Criminal Code. The phrase "for greater certainty" in legal documents is used to clarify and emphasize specific points to deflate the possibility of any ambiguities or misunderstanding about the application of the interpretation of a law. Section 268, Sub 1 of the Criminal Code, which Bill S-228 seeks to amend, establishes the offense of aggravated assault. This offense includes acts that wound, maim, disfigure, or endanger life. Bill S-228 adds a new provision stating, for greater certainty, that a sterilization procedure constitutes wounding or maiming for the purpose of aggravated assault. The bill also defines a sterilization procedure as any intervention that permanently prevents reproduction, regardless of if there is a potential to reverse the procedure. Bill S-228 does not create a new consent framework. Instead, by expressly tying sterilization procedures to aggravated assault under Section 268, it ensures that the existing consent rules in Section 265 sub 3 apply. Those rules state that consent is not valid if obtained through force, threats, fraud, duress, or the exercise of authority. In other words, the bill reinforces that sterilization without free and informed consent is an aggravated assault, and the Criminal Code's general consent protections already in place govern these cases. Bill S-228 affirms this well-established framework for consent in the specific context of sterilization, given its irreversible consequences. Most importantly, the bill is clear that medical providers who sterilize someone during an emergency surgery are protected by Section 45. Section 45 reads, "Everyone is protected from criminal responsibility for performing a surgical operation on any person for the benefit of that person if the operation is performed with reasonable care and skill, and it is reasonable to perform the operation having regard to the state of the health of the person at the time the operation is performed and to all the circumstances of the case." Reproductive autonomy is also preserved. Those who voluntarily seek sterilization or gender-affirming care remain entirely unaffected. This bill only targets those who abuse and sterilize without consent or with coerced consent. Colleagues, this committee's own study demonstrated why this clarity is necessary. Despite existing assault provisions found in Section 268, no prosecutions have ever been brought forward for forced sterilization. Survivors have told you, often at great personal cost, that the absence of an explicit prohibition has enabled impunity. National and international bodies, including the Senate Standing Committee on Human Rights in its report, "The Scars We Carry, Forced and Coerced Sterilization of Persons in Canada, Part 2, Recommendation 1 was to criminalize the act of forced and coerced sterilization. Recommendation 1 reads that legislation be introduced to add a specific offense to the Criminal Code prohibiting forced and coerced sterilization. This bill is before you because after more than 7 years of study and testimony, the issue has not gone away. Survivors such as Nicole Rabbit and many others told this committee that forced and coerced sterilization continues, and that action is urgently needed. Their collective voices led to the introduction of Bill S-250. Bill S-228 carries that work forward. The evidence is on the record. The drafting has been refined with input from the Department of Justice. The Senate has already endorsed this bill unanimously. Our task now is to finish what we started. Survivors have waited long enough. Every day without this bill risks another violation of someone's reproductive autonomy. My goal, which I know we all share, is to do everything in my power to make sure not one more person is sterilized against their will in Canada. That was the intention of this bill from the very start. I believe that this bill clearly outlines a path ahead to put an end to this horrific practice. By reporting Bill S-228 quickly and without amendment, this committee can honor the survivors' voices, respect the work already completed, and ensure that Canada's criminal law explicitly prohibits this heinous practice. All my relations. Miigwech, merci, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boyer. I'll now go to questions, and I'll ask Senator Denise Batters, the Deputy Chair, to start, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, Senator Boyer, and thank you also for noting in your opening remarks that this bill is the exact same bill that we last dealt with at this committee, so it reflects those amendments that you provided. That very much helps us to know exactly what we're dealing with here. Thank you. And you've previously noted the support of the prior Justice Minister and his office and department to you on this bill, and the help that they provided you with the significant amendments that resulted in the form of the bill significantly pared down as it does now stand. And I'm wondering if you've had discussions with the current Minister of Justice, Sean Fraser, and found out whether the current federal government supports this bill and what they plan to do to potentially help it pass.
My office did contact Minister Fraser's office about this, and we didn't receive any real feedback other than, go ahead, that's fine. There were no changes to it or anything other than that, but we did have conversations.
So he or someone from his office indicated go ahead, but no indication as to whether there would be an attempt in the House of Commons to try to have it go through relatively quickly, because of course it died on the order paper. We passed it through this committee and it passed the Senate, but then it died on the order paper when the government prorogued and then dissolved Parliament.
Yes, I believe it had support then by all the parties, and I believe it still has that support from what I understand.
All right. Senator, in your recent speech, you referred to the case of Dr. Andrew Kataska, I hope I'm saying that right, saying that your bill could have a deterrent effect and perhaps have prevented such an act. And I'm wondering if you could explain to us how legally Bill S-228 would have actually changed the outcome of that case, given that the RCMP did choose not to pursue charges despite the relevant existing provisions of the criminal code.
Thank you for that question. The Survivors Circle for Reproductive Justice has been in place since January 2023, and it was put together by myself and another lawyer that would allow the survivors to speak with one voice. Pardon me. They've become a very strong organization, and we've discussed this bill and what sort of implementation and education plans would be in place when this bill becomes law. And the fact that this bill would become law in Canada and it would be implemented with an understanding with survivors, that would certainly prevent something like the Kataska case from coming again, from arising again, because I do believe that it would be a deterrent in that there would be like a sober second thought. When he said, let me see if I can find a reason to take the other tube, perhaps he would have thought, oh, there is a criminal code that may affect me if I do that. So I'm thinking that the deterrent factor is going to be a strong point with this bill when it becomes law.
Okay, but on that, on what basis do you make the claim, that, considering that the penalties already provided for aggravated assault are significant, and what would make a physician think twice, as you were saying, under your bill S-228, those provisions as compared to the current aggravated assault regime?
Because this specifically makes it, it puts it in aggravated assault. It puts the act of sterilization without consent into the criminal code. It labels it specifically. And that is going to be a deterrent. It hasn't been before. It's been, you know, there's lots of reasons throughout provincial law and through medical associations that consent has to be free, informed, and prior. But when it isn't, there are, you know, it needs to be clarified. So I think that, you know, I think it's valid.
Because you're saying that the naming of it as sterilization, that's what you're saying you think is the deterrent factor of actually naming it that, rather than just having it included within the scope of aggravated assault.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Would you say that the real problem could also lie more in the law enforcement part of this, and the reluctance maybe of police forces to act on these kinds of cases, maybe rather than the current wording of the criminal code provision?
I thank you for bringing that up, because that has been an issue, and I'll tell you why it has been an issue. Because there was a point a few years ago that the RCMP the RCMP commissioner had said that she was really going to crack down on this issue of forced sterilizations, because it was becoming very much in the forefront. And so what happened? What they did is they put a call. The RCMP put a call out for Indigenous women or any people to contact them if they had been sterilized. And I mean, because of the distrust between Indigenous people and the criminal justice system, there was many people were reluctant to call, but some did. Some did call, and then the next thing they knew, they had the police at their door battering them, trying to get information out of them, and then they're phoning me and saying, what do I do? The police are at the door, and they're insisting I give them information. They're terrifying me. So it kind of had a, there needs to be some work done there, and that's why I'm glad I was able to mention the Survivors Circle for Reproductive Justice, because that's just the group that can work with the police to have some positive outcomes rather than terror.
Just to briefly finish off, you mentioned the RCMP. Who was it from the RCMP that said that?
It said what?
That when she was calling for, you were mentioning that someone from the RCMP was calling for women to come forward.
It was the commissioner. It was the commissioner at the time had put a call out, and that's public information.
Okay.
She put a call out for women that had been sterilized to contact the RCMP, and anyone that did certainly wasn't followed up, and I think the whole issue was just dropped because it turned out to be such a fiasco.
Thank you.
Next is Senator Meville Deschênes, followed by Senator Prosper and Senator Simons.
Bienvenue, sénatrice Boyer. Je vais vous poser...
Welcome, Senator Boyer. I'll ask my questions in French. Can you hear the simultaneous interpretation? I received, and you probably also received, the brief from the Commission of Healthcare for First Nations in Quebec and Labrador that was sent to the committee on the 22nd of September. Now, that report was quite lengthy and includes 7 recommendations. I'd like to hear your thoughts about 2 of those recommendations. The report states, and the effect that it has, is that there must absolutely be in this bill, perhaps in the preamble, wording about cultural safety for Indigenous persons. I know that the bill has been radically shortened. I'm fully aware of this. But, I'd like to know your thoughts on this. For example, look at the first page of the report, issues to be considered regarding the bill, and then there's item 1. So in your opinion, is this bill adequate as it is, or should it be improved by adding the cultural sensibility of Indigenous persons, i.e. respecting cultural identity? You are more aware of these issues than I am. Do you believe that that's a current failing of the bill as the report would indicate?
For that question. If I could have rewritten the whole bill to make it culturally appropriate, I certainly would have. But it would never have been able to be, it wouldn't jive with the criminal code. I like the report. I've worked with them, with these women since Susie Bazille started doing her work, and I have very much respect for it. As far as putting that into the preamble, I think because the preamble plays such a limited role, especially when it's amending another act, that it really, if we started putting things into the preamble, I don't think it would actually solve the problem. I think that we need to have, like, after the bill is passed, we need to take like a really good look at it with the survivors, the people that have been affected by this. There's 200, there's between 200 and 300 survivors right now that are probably watching and very close to these issues. And they're the ones that can direct it. By us putting this into the preamble, it's not going to solve the problem, but afterwards the survivors can help do that. They can help with the cultural safety of what the doctors need to know, what the medical institutions need to know, and what the hospitals need to know in their consent forms. So it's fixing the preamble is not. I mean, it's good here. It's good to hear this. It's good to see this. It's good to get this out in print. But we need some positive action from survivors that know how they feel and what needs to be done to help them.
Je vous remercie pour cette réponse.
Thank you for that answer. Now, there's another thing that surprised me a tad when reading the report. The bill is very short, and in the bill it states that severing, cauterizing, and tying are three actions that are defined as sterilization. And yet in the report it states that cauterizing, for example, when you burn a part of an organ, that is no longer a standard of practice in the medical field and hasn't been for a number of years. And it surprises me that it would be in the criminal code that is perhaps not up to date. But is it an issue that there is a practice that is no longer used in an actual definition in a bill?
Thank you for the question. I believe that the wording of the sub 2 is the severing, clipping, tying, or cauterizing in whole or in part of the fallopian tubes, ovaries, or uterus of a person, or any other procedure performed on a person that results in the permanent prevention of reproduction. That covers everything. That will cover every type of sterilization, including chemical castration, or on any person, a man or a woman, any person, any human. So I don't think that amending it because we think that severing is out of date would do any good. I think it's caught well enough by the other wording in that section. Thank you.
Senator Prosper, followed by Senator Simons, Senator Pate, Senator Saint-Germain.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Senator Boyer, for your advocacy and your commitment to seeing this issue through, which an extensive history there. It really struck me when you said there were about 200 to 300 survivors potentially watching this proceeding. I want to sort of get your thoughts. I've been looking at the report from the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights, the scars that we carry, forced and coerced sterilization of persons in Canada, Part 2. And in the introduction, and I'll just quote the section I want you to provide further detail on. It says, in June 2021, the committee released its initial report, which found that the practice of forced and coerced sterilization is clearly continuing in Canada today. And it's both unreported and underestimated. The committee also expressed concern about the disproportionate impact of this practice on vulnerable and marginalized groups in Canada, and it goes on. Can you provide comment in terms of any reasons why the findings of it being underreported and underestimated, and then later the disproportionate impact? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. Just as an example, in 2017, I was a co-author of the external review of tubal ligation policies of the Saskatoon Health Region. And at that time, I had the opportunity to put posters out for women. Well, let me back up a little bit. The reason why I had done that report was because the two women had been reported to the Saskatoon Star Phoenix that they had been sterilized against their will in the Saskatoon hospital. And the reporter contacted me, and she said, this is 2015, she contacted me and said, what do you think about this? And I said, well, you know, that's against the law. You can't do that. That's criminal. It's an assault. They should be charged. It's terrible. It's against international law. It's against Indigenous law. And so Betty Ann Adam, who had called me, said, thank you very much. And she published the first article about 2 women being sterilized in the same circumstances at the Saskatoon Hospital, and they were both Indigenous. And then 2 more women came forward, and 2 more, and 2 more, and 2 more, and pretty soon there was 11 women that came forward. And the 11 women that came forward, the Saskatoon Health Authority started getting a little worried about that, and they had decided that they needed somebody to do an external review on their tubal ligation policies, and they had contacted me and asked me if I would do that. But in the meantime, I had done several interviews across the country talking about this issue that was going on in a Saskatoon hospital, and so they asked me if I would do it, and I said that I had felt very strongly about what they had done, and that there was other interviews, and they said that the elders had asked for me to come because that was my home area. They knew that I knew the area, and I had a wide network of Indigenous people that knew me. And I said, I will do that if the elders have asked, if you will grant me these 3 things I'm asking you. The first one is that this report is made public. The second one is that I get to choose who works with me. And I chose Dr. Judy Bartlett, who was a Métis physician that I had worked with at the National Aboriginal Health Organization. I had been an operating room nurse before. She had worked as a physician in the hospitals. She knew the hospital culture. I knew the hospital culture. And I asked for the resources that we required, and I said I would not be unreasonable. So at that time, when we did the report, when the report was put out, there was a lot of we put it out in Cree. We had women come and talk to us. Many of them would call our hotline and hang up. Many of them would call and say hello and then hang up. Many of them would call and make an appointment and then not show up just because of the trauma involved. The trauma was so outstanding with women who have been sterilized or hear this. Sometimes when I'm out speaking to different organizations and there's people waiting to talk to me, and they say, it happened to me. It happened to my auntie. It happened to my sister. And the more I talk about it and the more other people talk about it, the more people that come forward. But there's so many that can't. My office gets calls and they say, they call me and say, I need to speak to the senator. And then they can't talk because so it goes hidden. It goes hidden until it's talked about, and out of shame, people that I've talked to have said that in 25 years they've never said those words before. So the trauma, I mean, it was traumatic for us as you know doing this report, but what we put in place, and I'm just going to finish with this. What we put in place was we had an elder with us. I want to say her name is Elder Mary Lee from Saskatoon, and she is a wonderful human being, and every morning we would, when we were interviewing, all of us would hold hands. There would be Elder Mary Lee, there would be myself, there would be Judy, there would be our researcher that was with us that answered the phone, our Cree speaker. We would hold hands. And we would pray, and we would ask the Creator to keep us strong enough to be able to get through that day. When the women came in and they testified, and they were strong enough to do it, the women that came in that testified that were strong enough, and they'd fall to pieces when they're talking about these traumatic events, they'd fall to pieces, and we'd say, would you like Mary to come in? And she would be in an adjoining room, and she would come in, and what she would do is she'd put her arms around them and she would hold them and say, I'm going to hug you back together. And she would hold them until they could gather themselves to finish the interview. So there's so much behind the scenes that the ones that we interviewed were the ones that were strong enough to come forward. But there's so many in their journey to get to that point where they can talk about it, or even, do phone me or a one-on-one. I have had a lot of people contact me that are so traumatized, and we have a brochure that we can send to them about, do you need help? Do you need help right away? Who have you got for your supports? Who have you got? Do you want to talk to somebody? Do you need a legal somebody to talk to? What do you want? Do you want to just talk to me? I'm good with that. So this has gone on since I've been here at the Senate, since 2018. And I get calls. My office is a safe haven for people to call. They're going to get help when they call me. But there's so many that can't come forward. That's why it's underestimated.
Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Simons?
Thank you so much, Senator Boyer, for bearing witness and for bearing the burden of this work. I have so much respect for your goals and so many outstanding concerns about whether this amendment will do what you want it to do without having unintended consequences for other people. So let me ask my questions. You've talked a lot about coercion. There's nothing in this bill as it's currently written that deals with the issue of coercion. So I wanted to ask you a short question, if I can get a short answer first. What percentage of cases do you think involve force, something that's done while the woman's unconscious and she has no knowledge of it, versus how many people are pushed, convinced, have this proposition made to them and then they regret it afterwards? So, I mean, what percentage are actually being forced versus being coerced?
I say it's about 50-50, I'd say. The coercion is very much, I have to say coercion sort of lies on the side of threatening. It's more threats. I'm going to take your baby away. We're either going to sterilize you, you're going to lose your baby one way or another. Your baby, this was a very hard one to hear about a woman who, her first child had cerebral palsy, and the doctor wanted to sterilize her for her second child and told her that her second child might have cerebral palsy as well. So if you know if you weren't sterilized. So cerebral palsy, well, it does, because cerebral palsy comes from a lack of oxygen at birth. So what that was a threat. It was a threat that your baby may have brain damage as well. So
you're suggesting that he was threatening that he would damage the baby.
correct.
That's a powerful allegation.
So is sterilization.
Yeah. So that I'm clear, the assault provisions say, for purposes of this section, no consent is obtained where the complainant submits or does not resist by, and would you say that's the exercise of authority? Because it's not the application of force or fraud. Mm-hmm. It would be
The exercise of authority.
Okay.
The powerful and the powerlessness.
Yeah, it seems to me it would be very difficult to prove coercion. So,
Well, that's, when it falls into the assault provisions, there's a lot of case law about that already. Coercion is defined in case law, and there's lots of case law to back it up. So that's why putting it into the criminal code, into the aggravated assault provision is probably the best place for it. It can fall back on to the existing case law and jurisprudence in place.
there's no mention of the word coercion in your bill.
Well, there's coercion in the assault provisions.
Okay.
It's with consent.
Right, but the word coercion doesn't appear, just so that I'm
Right.
clear. Okay. So, my underlying concern remains this. As Senator Batters has pointed out, it is already aggravated assault to remove somebody's uterus without consent. The problem seems to be one of either women who are afraid to come forward or police who are hesitant to charge. At the same time, I worry that a physician, looking at the language of your proposal and not looking to Section 45, which is in a completely different, part of the criminal code, would see that standard, ordinary medical procedures are now being criminalized. I mean, we don't criminalize an appendectomy against your will, or an amputation against your will. But now we are putting language in that says every single sterilization procedure from a vasectomy on down is illegal. And I know that's not your intent because it's saved by Section 45. But I really do worry about a chilling effect that a physician who is not well versed in the ins and outs of the criminal code would look at that and say, I may be hesitant to offer or even suggest a tubal ligation to a woman or a hysterectomy to somebody. I may be hesitant to perform a vasectomy. I may be particularly hesitant to perform gender-affirming care for somebody who's trans. So I'm wondering if you could explain to me how we avoid having a chilling effect of this so that women, I think we're all agreed that what women need is reproductive choice, that we're not, in order to protect one class of women's reproductive rights, we're not taking away another class of women's reproductive rights.
I think, thank you for your question. I think that it doesn't restrict any type of gender-affirming care or sterilizations for people that have the ability to give consent. And every doctor is going to know that under Section 45 of the Criminal Code, that is what allows them to do emergency procedures, or, you know, they're protected through Section 45. So I think that any new doctor going in is not going to have to be worried about that. I mean, in an aggravated assault provision, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It doesn't create any new restrictions. It simply states that sterilization without valid consent is aggravated assault. That's what it simply states. Section 45 is the covers surgical operations.
If I were a doctor, I might be concerned that I talk to a woman, we have a conversation, I have a good faith belief that she has agreed, and then afterwards she very much regrets her decision, and that I might be charged. I mean, I think it would make me as a practitioner a little bit worried.
Well, that's why we have prosecutors that would delve into it, and that's why we have case law and jurisprudence that goes back 30 years on these topics, and that's why it's in the aggravated assault provision. So thank you very much.
Senator Pate, Senator Saint-Germain, Udar, Wells, and Clement. So we've got a few short minutes.
Thank you, Senator Boyer, and thank you for all your work on this and your team, and not just while you're in the Senate, but before being here and shining a light on something that very few Canadians knew about before you started doing that work. I was in, as you know, in Saskatoon when Ms. Adams broke that story. And I was struck by not just this forced sterilization, but many, many examples of cases. I mean, now we know about Joyce Echequans because of her case. Many examples like that of people coming forward, particularly Indigenous people, and especially Indigenous women, talking about the racism, the misogyny within the health system, the lack of support. And, you know, criminal law is a standard that we set to show what behavior we expect in what we won't abide. My question, and you know what I'm going to ask because we've talked about this, is, and you mentioned that you, part of your motivation is to deter, of course, the criminal, racist, misogynist behavior of medical services. You know, I'm concerned, and I know others are raising concerns, that part of the reason prosecutions haven't been brought forward is, as you've said, people are reluctant to come forward. There's a mistrust of the system. I'm not sure how the law changing will help that. I'd like to hear more about how you think that will help. And I understand that's the will of the survivors. But as well, what added value the bill offers in addressing the root causes of the, you know, why these forced and coerced sterilizations have happened, such as the systemic racism, colonial history, and ableism in healthcare, something you know a lot about and have worked on. So if you could expand on that and why this focus and what else needs to be happening as well.
Thank you very much for that, because I'd like to speak on that. I believe that the first key, that the key to the door has just been opened with the Survivors Circle for Reproductive Justice. Pulling those survivors together and watching them have that power, they're taking their power back. And they're setting a template for others to do the same. When we know that the Survivor Circle for Reproductive Justice is a very powerful organization led by very powerful women. And we know that they're creating the template, they're creating this, this plan to eradicate situations such as this, address racism in the healthcare system. But they're starting in little pockets here, little pockets there, and they're watching it grow. And I think that they can set the standard. They can set a standard for this to become a national framework for other organizations to work with. Like we have there's groups within the Maritimes. There's women's groups I've gone to speak with there, Indigenous women that have pulling themselves together, are banding together. The same thing on the prairies. The prairies. So I think that pockets of very powerful women that are survivors that are spread out through the country can be joined in a national framework that would really start addressing some of these issues. And also working with the police, because there's such a history there. There needs to be a section within each one of these pockets that does do cross work with policing to build relationships. Building relationships of understanding is what it is, and being able to make that grow. And I think that's some of the areas that we can look at. But I see, for the first time, I'm really hopeful. After all of these years, when that Survivors Circle was put together, and I see it growing and thriving and blossoming right now, and their registry, they're hardcore. They're making sure people are verified. They know they have a system in place, and they're perfecting it, and they're bringing more people in with more voices. And so, I think that this is, there's hope there. There's hope for all of these issues that we've talked about already. There's hope that there's people out there that can really lead and take some pressure off me. Like there's people that I can call. I can call and say, I need you to help here. I need you over here in Halifax. I need you over here. And so I think that there's a national framework that's coming. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd also like to speak in French, if I may. Senator Boyer, by training, by experience, and by your status as an Indigenous woman, you are at the very heart of the two key issues raised by this bill. First, upholding women's rights and human rights, upholding their right to use their body as they see fit, i.e. in the health sphere, and also physicians who, in good faith, may have made mistakes under the criminal code, but may not get the requisite legal protection. So we have two issues here that are clearly important. You have legal experience yourself. By tabling this bill, I gather that you're satisfied that these two potentially conflicting interests, that of patients and of physicians, are truly protected and upheld. Could you briefly explain how, in both cases you're satisfied that this legislation meets your objectives.
That. Again, I want to refer to what I see coming in the future. I see it's not just, one or two of us paddling away trying to get stuff done and making sure all the everything legally is right in place and the women are tended to, and there's power with numbers. And with every one of the women that I spoke to, that I interviewed, and I still talk to, I say, there's a whole army behind you. There's an army right here. And we're strong and we're tough. And we can figure these things out together. And I'll get you what you need. You can then take over. So when I'm looking at with physicians that may, I go into medical schools. I go to the medical schools. I go to the youth. I go to the high schools. And the medical students, what I say to them is I say, I want to know. And I usually take a physician with me. There's many Indigenous physicians that like to do these things with me. So we go in and we have, huge class of medical students. And I say, you tell me what you would do if you're in the OR and you're asked to assist on a woman who says she doesn't want this tubal ligation. What do you do? So they look at each other and they say, well, what do we do? And I say, figure it out. Figure it out right now. You figure it out. And I said, you break into groups. You tell me what you would do. And then they come up with these ideas on how they can take control themselves and how they can stop it. Or they can make sure that, because that's taking a huge risk as a medical student. You got a senior doctor there. And I'm saying, there's not, the doctors that are doing this they're not all of the doctors, but there's handfuls that are doing it. But there's ways to stop it, and it's infiltrating from under. And that's one way. It's through the medical students. And we have the survivors. We have the survivors that can now go out and do that. Give some talks. Talk to the students. Talk to the medical students. And so I think that's one way that is very effective. I believe it's very effective because those doctors now those students are now doctors, and some of them have actually come and thanked me for that, because they get into situations where they need to take their power. They need to do that themselves, and they do. So, I think, it's figuring things out as you go, too. Like, you come up with with one of those problems, and we'll figure it out. There's enough of us out there. There's brainstorming sessions that I have with other lawyers, and there's a strong network of people who are working behind the scenes here, and not just with Indigenous people. This is with people with disabilities too, and intersex people, and people that are needing gender affirming care, and there's reproductive justice and injustice that comes to me all the time, and it's a huge network of people that are very committed and very strong and ready to figure out what we have to do. But I know for sure this bill is really important, because this is going to be a marker. This is a marker for people to look at. Yes, we've got it. We have something in the criminal code now. We have power. We're taking back power. We can figure out everything as we go, too. That's what happens when you make change.
Brièvement, une supplémentaire, supplementary, thank you.
A supplementary question, if I may. Now, if I've understood you correctly, patients' rights and providing the necessary protection for physicians who uphold the criminal code as amended, well, that provision is already in the legislation. But you're arguing for, in addition to that legislation, there be a code of praxis that would be enhanced by way of awareness building. In other words, some of the recommendations that we are seeing come out of some groups wouldn't warrant being included in the legislation per se, but would be better placed as part of the awareness building campaign about when the criminal code is amended. So it would be a protocol in the code of practice rather than incorporated into the legislation itself. Is that correct?
It's incorporated into the legislation. There should be codes of practice. I know the First Nations Health Authority has been very, very active and leaders in the area of revising all of their consent forms to be culturally appropriate and trauma-informed that are in British Columbia. So I know that because I've worked on it with them. And they're leaders in that area. So yes, there needs to be codes of practice for every single hospital. There needs to be a code of practice for every single medical association that's culturally appropriate and trauma informed by survivors. Thank you for that.
Very much.
We have Senator Udar, Senator Wells, and Senator Clement, and I'll make sure that all the senators in the first round get a chance to ask the questions. Senator Udar.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'll also be speaking in French. First, I'd like to thank you, Senator Boyer. From the very outset, since I arrived in the Senate, you were already working on this legislation. It's been a number of years, and you have my entire support, full support. Now, I'd just like to come back to a remark that was made earlier concerning an amendment to the preamble of the bill. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Senator Boyer. Could you remind us, would an amendment of the preamble, as asked in a previous question, would that have an undesirable effect on other groups of women? Now, let's remember, and thank you for submitting documentation, for example, the report from the Senate Committee on Human Rights entitled Forced Sterilization of Persons in Canada, the 2021 report, page 12. The committee heard evidence and that women in situations of poverty, in disability, Canadians of African and North African origin, racialized women, HIV-positive women, are also liable to be forcibly sterilised or under duress in Canadian healthcare institutions where the oversight of their own bodies is either limited or taken away from them. So I was glad to hear your response regarding the fact that the preamble would not be amended, and you just talked about a key amendment in the eyes of other groups of women who are subjected to this kind of forced procedure. Now, to my mind, the bill, as currently worded, is entirely satisfactory. It also covers a number of other issues that the Human Rights Senate Committee looked at in 2021, I might add. Now, Senator Boyer said earlier, she just talked about the key concerns of these other groups that we shouldn't forget about here today. So I'd like the Senator to be able to elaborate on that.
Thank you. In the first report from the Human Rights Committee, it was very important that we take a big look to see who's affected by this. I didn't know that there was 250 Black women in Nova Scotia that underwent hysterectomies without consent. I didn't know that. So there's really pressing issues out there. We also received a letter from Inclusion Canada about people with disabilities and how important it is that it's noted that they're undergoing sterilization as well without consent. So there's a lot of issues, and I think that because the Survivor Circle are leaders in this area, I think that, like I said, their cohesion and their organization can be a leader for other groups, a big umbrella group, to be able to address sterilization in all of these other areas that we noted that were brought to us in the first testimony on report number 1. So I believe that is possible. I believe it's possible. I'm hopeful. Thank you.
Senator Wells?
Thank you, and thank you for the amazing advocacy that you've continued to pursue and the justice that you hope to see enacted for the survivors, as little as we can give. We've heard recently from politicians, including in my province of Alberta, who are equating gender-affirming care to a form of coercive sterilization. So I'm glad to hear that in your opening comments, you're correcting this misinformation and clearly indicating that this bill would not apply to gender-affirming care. You know, the concern is that a bill can be weaponized with unintended consequences that target a vulnerable minority for political gains. We're certainly seeing a lot of that these days. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the consultations that you've done with groups and stakeholders, and particularly with the 2S LGBTQI+ community. And many concerns have been raised by the intersex community that continue to be, especially as babies or as infants, subject to coercive sterilization through doctors convincing parents that these are medically necessary procedures. And of course, we have the challenge of, you know, the criminal code that gives a blanket exemption over what appears to be normal genitalia. I'm not sure exactly who defines normal. So just your thoughts on what you heard and how you've been sensitive to that feedback in crafting your bill here.
Thank you. I do talk to a lot of people, and there's one issue that stands out for me that I'd like to have the time to research it or ask the survivors group to do that, because I'm looking at the policies within each province that when people are transitioning to from female to male, that the requirement for them to be sterilized is in health policies. At least in Ontario it was, and I found that completely appalling, and I couldn't understand why. So it's an area that I needed to have talked to various physicians that are working in that area and ask why and what goes on, and I need to know what's going on in other provinces and why that would be necessary. I was told it was something to do with hormones, but I don't understand that yet, and I haven't had any kind of reasonable explanation for that happening. And I'm not 100% sure. I'm only mentioning it now because it's an outstanding issue on my plate to work on. There's a lot of people that have contacted me with various issues on reproductive injustice, and especially in Alberta. There's been people contacting me from Alberta that are scared, you know, terrified, and I think that this bill doesn't have anything to do with people who want to be sterilized or don't want to be sterilized. It doesn't take any agency away from anybody, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Senator Wells, because it's an area that needs more exploration. I think that there should be a whole, like a committee, a type of committee, some sort of research group. I know the survivors would be definitely interested in something like this as well, because I think it's a very important issue, and I believe they do as well. Thank you for that question and bringing that up on record.
Senator Clément?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions have been answered, and so I just want to thank you, Senator Boyer, for your leadership. And I did want to come back to what Senatrice Houdard was raising, that the work of Indigenous women around this issue means that other women who live in the intersection, Black women, are going to benefit from this work, and their voices are there too, and noted. So I did want to just come back to that point, and thank you. Merci. Nyawa.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, Thank you for your questions, and I want to say to Senator Boyer, thank you very much for your evidence here today, Senator Boyer, your advocacy and your leadership on these issues.